I'm not exaggerating when I say that Baldur's Gate 3 has completely taken over my life. The grind has been real trying to finish the game over the last 2 months, and after finally beating it for the first time, I can now say with full confidence that every single hour I spent playing has been more than worth it. To me, Baldur's Gate 3 is a 10 out of 10. It's absolutely my game of the year, and that's because it feels like a game that is perfectly made for me. For the longest time, I've always wanted to play a video game exactly like Baldur's Gate 3, although I never expected to play such a game because it just seemed way too idealistic, too good to be true almost. However, the mad lads at Larian were somehow able to take everything I like in a video game and make it a reality. My name is Andre, and let's talk about how much I love Shadowheart, I mean Baldur's Gate 3. Before I continue, spoiler warning. I'll be showing footage as well as talking about Acts 1 and 2. It's mostly out of context or very generalized, but it's still mild spoilers, so proceed at your own risk. If you didn't know, Baldur's Gate 3 is a CRPG developed and published by Larian Studios. It's an isometric strategy game that focuses on turn-based combat, exploration, and most importantly, role-playing.
Exquisite.
That's because Baldur's Gate 3 is a continuation to a video game series based on Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D for short. If you're not familiar with D&D, it's essentially the first ever role-playing game. It's a tabletop pen and paper RPG that mixes aspects of wargaming, role-playing, and dice rolling so that you can become a dungeon-delving, dragon-slaying hero. In fact, the genre of video game RPGs that we know and love today are almost entirely rooted in the game systems that D&D invented all the way back in 1974. Now, the reason I'm giving you a quick history lesson on RPGs is that Baldur's Gate 3 re-emphasizes the role-playing aspect of role-playing games, which for the most part seems to be lost in our modern conception of video game RPGs. But unlike many other RPGs, Baldur's Gate 3 is able to give you the freedom in-game to roleplay as the character you've created. For example, the dialogue choices that you can make throughout the game changes depending on your class, race, abilities, skill proficiencies, and it even tracks the past decisions you've made within your campaign. The NPCs that you get to interact with can change depending on the things your character has done and said, and oftentimes these NPCs will treat and react to you differently depending on a multitude of these factors. In my own campaign, I decided to create a half-elf druid named Florian. For the most part, he's chaotic good, a generally morally good character who tries to do the right thing and helps those in need. But he's also a little bit of a bad boy and isn't afraid to stand up for himself. Not to mention that he oh so happens to raise up every single one of his companions, unintentionally of course.
I want to taste you.
Oh my god!
After all, my man Florian only has space for one person in his heart, and that is for his one true love, the Daughter of Darkness herself. So then, did I ever break character and do some really heinous shit during some parts of the game? Absolutely. There were definitely a few times when I let the intrusive thoughts win and I wasn't even playing as the Dark Urge. I may have stolen a lot of coin, more than I needed. I may have, shall we say, silenced a few NPCs who were being a little too annoying. And I may have murdered my way out of certain situations that didn't need any murdering. However, it's nice that Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't systematically punish you for going against your character's supposed morality. What I mean by that is that there are certain RPGs where you feel pressured to always choose either the obviously good or obviously bad dialogue options, and picking anything else in between is pretty much just a waste from a gameplay perspective, either because you'd lose favor towards certain characters or you'd be missing out on points to level up your skills based on a morality meter. What's brilliant about Baldur's Gate 3's dialogue system is, instead of clearly highlighting the good option in blue, the bad option in red, and the rest being totally useless neutral options, oftentimes it'll present you with a series of morally gray options where you don't quite know what the outcome will be depending on your choice. It adds intrigue to your decision making as the consequences of your words and actions can sometimes be surprising and unpredictable. That's the game's way of pushing you to stop metagaming for a second and to just truly roleplay as your character, eliciting the question, what would I or my character actually say in this current moment? Now, Baldur's Gate 3 does punish you for certain actions, but it almost always fits in the context of the narrative, and it also entirely depends on the situation. You fail a persuasion check against some goblins. Time to roll initiative. You get caught lockpicking a door to a restricted area. Off to jail you go. You murder an entire village. Then you'll miss out on NPCs to talk to, receive quests from, and trade goods with. You decide to cheat on Shadowheart with Lae'zel? First of all, how fucking dare you to even consider such a thing? Second of all, she'll find out and break up with you, and you'll forever live with the guilt of knowing that the baddest girl in all of Faerun gave you her heart and you broke it to pieces, you piece of shit. Sorry, I got a little passionate there for a second, but anyway. My point is, never have I played a game that gives you so much freedom in how you want to approach quests, scenarios, and even combat encounters. In an interview with Sven Vinke, the CEO of Larian, he was asked what the most important thing is to consider when trying to tell an interactive story, and Vinke simply responded with, respect player choice and don't say no. Fundamentally speaking, you could try to do a pacifist run, persuading your way out of every single combat encounter and killing no one, even when you're forced to fight. On the other side of the spectrum, you could certainly try killing everyone and everything that moves. Even your main companions and other plot-relevant NPCs are not safe from you if you decide to become a true murder hobo. And while I haven't tried such extreme role-playing options myself, the most important takeaway here is that you can try to do anything you want. As long as it's written in the game's code, Baldur's Gate 3's world is your oyster and you're free to do whatever you want to do. It's such an eye-opening experience finally being able to play a game where every single decision you make, even the tiniest ones, impacts the world in some way, shape, or form. The choices you make in Baldur's Gate 3 actually matter. By investing so much on the role-playing aspect of the game, Larian is starting to redefine the RPG genre once more, and that's why, to me, Baldur's Gate 3 is the pinnacle of modern RPGs. It amazes me that the game, which can take an upwards of 100 hours to complete, features hundreds of fully voiced NPCs, with the voice actors almost always delivering a stellar performance. I have nothing but praise for all the voice actors who did a wonderful job voicing the main companions, especially Shadowheart, my queen.
They're deadly poisonous. Joking. They're safe.
And there are also standout performances from some of the side characters that you'll eventually meet throughout your journey.
What's better than a devil you don't know? A devil you do.
Even the narrator, who dubs over literally everything else in the game, is an absolute delight to listen to. I never once got tired of Amelia Tyler's voice, despite the sheer volume of lines she had to narrate in this incredibly massive game.
I love that the narrator gives a shit about the animals more than she does the players. Just like, oh, aren't they having a nice time? But you're gonna die. A lot.
When Larian said that there's about 174 hours worth of cutscenes in the game, they didn't mean that you're going to be forced to sit down and watch the longest movie ever made. What they meant is they've accounted for all the different branching possibilities that a player can conceivably make, and they've prepared animated cutscenes that are entirely voiced and motion captured in order to be able to react to your decisions, whatever they may be. This is the lengths you have to go to in order to fully immerse your players into the huge pseudo-open world you've created. Larian knows this, and ever since it went into production, came into early access in 2020, and finally until its full release now, they've invested a lot of time, money, resources, and talent in order to make sure that the players can get the best immersive experience that Baldur's Gate 3 can possibly offer. Furthermore, it's important to note that there's no possible way you'll be able to experience every single cutscene in one playthrough. This means that the game is highly replayable solely from a narrative and role-playing perspective, not even taking gameplay and all the different kinds of fun builds you can make into consideration. Whether you decide to play single player or co-op, or if you choose a different race, class, background, moral alignment, or party composition, Baldur's Gate 3 encourages you to experiment with several playthroughs, ensuring that no one playthrough will ever be exactly the same. While there are many ways to approach the game's overarching narrative, for the most part, its story hooks and calls to action stays the same. Baldur's Gate 3 starts when you, as well as your main companions, get abducted and taken on a Mind Flayer ship called a Nautiloid. See, Mind Flayers are basically space aliens who eat brains and enslave every other race they come across. So they're pretty much bad news across all of D&D lore. Those that get abducted are infected with a Mind Flayer tadpole that will eventually turn them into Mind Flayers, destroying and erasing the person that once was. The main conflict centers around your quest to remove the tadpole that is stuck in your brain. But as the story progresses, you realize that there is something different, maybe even something special, about the tadpole that you're infected with. Instead of violently turning you into a mind flayer, the tadpole seems to be protecting you and giving you some crazy powers. The rest of the story revolves around unraveling the mysteries behind this infection, and to do so, you and your companions must journey to the city of Baldur's Gate, where all the answers to your questions seem to lie. Throughout this journey, you'll encounter a bunch of different factions and political forces that will either help or impede you in your journey to Baldur's Gate. More importantly, you'll also get to know more about your companions, some better than others, and who knows, if you get that approval high enough, maybe you'll even find your true soulmate. Now, I'm no Baldur's Gate expert. In fact, Baldur's Gate 3, like many others, is my introduction to the franchise. I wasn't even born yet when the first game came out. However, what's great about Baldur's Gate 3 is that you don't need to have played the first 2 games in order to get the full Baldur's Gate experience. That's because Larian understands that their player base will likely consist of players entirely new to the franchise, considering the 20+ year difference between the second and third game's release. That's why Baldur's Gate 3 takes place over 100 years after the events of the second game. It features an all-new cast of characters with a main conflict that is unique to the series thus far. This is done all the while staying true to what was already established, weaving in plot threads from the older games and reintroducing fan-favorite characters from the franchise. In other words, playing the first 2 games is more of an added bonus, and not a necessity for you to have experience in order to play Baldur's Gate 3. Likewise, the beauty of Baldur's Gate 3 is that you don't really need to know anything about D&D in order to play and enjoy the game. I myself am relatively new to D&D, starting with 5th edition, which is what Baldur's Gate 3 is based on. I discovered D&D back in 2021, and I eventually got my friend group to play with me. For the past 2 years, I've been DMing for my friends, and we're currently on our 3rd campaign. But even then, there's still so much more to learn about D&D, not only in terms of lore, but also in terms of mechanics. As someone who went into Baldur's Gate 3 with a decent amount of D&D knowledge, I found that the game actually helped me understand certain game mechanics and rulings that I found confusing in the TTRPG. I even incorporated a bunch of the house rules it has into my own campaign because I found it more fun to use than the vanilla 5e rules. And while I can't fully speak for those playing the game who have no idea what D&D is at all, I'm confident that the game, while it may seem really intimidating at first, does an alright job with its tutorials and countless menus at explaining the basics of how to play. In Baldur's Gate 3, every decision you make, in and out of combat, is tied to the outcome of a dice roll. While there are many types of dice in D&D, the one you'll be most familiar with is the D20. Whether you're making an attack roll, saving throw, or you're doing a skill check, its success or failure depends on how high or low you roll. There are many different ways to alter your odds of rolling a success. Whether it's because you have a bonus to your attack rolls or saving throws due to an item or racial feature, or you have proficiency in certain skills due to your class or background. But at the end of the day, every single roll you make will be determined by the will of RNG, and that is especially true if you turned off karmic dice in the settings, which I personally recommend in order to get that authentic D&D experience. Of course, there are things in the game that gives you advantage on your rolls, meaning you get to roll 2 dice for one check and pick the higher number. It also rewards you with inspiration, which, as far as I know, is one of the very few mechanics in the game that lets you re-roll a failed check, making inspiration an incredibly powerful resource to have. But on the other hand, there are also things in the game that will grant disadvantage and subtract from your rolls. As such, there is a constant balancing act between trying to give yourself the best odds of success, all the while trying to avoid the things that will sabotage your odds. RNG is a contentious topic in gaming, and while a lot of people hate the idea of leaving their fate to RNG, I personally like its inclusion in Baldur's Gate 3. Not only does the game stay true to its D&D identity of rolling dice, I also just think it's more fun not knowing the outcome of your decisions until the dice finishes rolling. There is a level of suspense and thrill behind the fact that everything you do is uncertain, and that's really where RNG in video games appeals to me, as there's something special about not knowing the unknown. From experiencing the euphoric joy of rolling a nat 20, to feeling heartbreak and disappointment from getting a nat 1, whether you like it or not, you'll be taken on a roller coaster of emotions while playing Baldur's Gate 3. Despite me singing all my praises, I understand that there will be barriers for some people that will keep them from enjoying the game. Baldur's Gate 3 may be the perfect game for me, but it doesn't mean that it's a perfect game in and of itself. There's a lot to love about Baldur's Gate 3, but for sure there's also a lot to hate about it too for some others. Whether it's the turn-based combat, the inventory management system, or the incorporation of D&D, there will always be existing preconceptions that will prevent certain players from even trying the game.
I'd rather die.
And that's completely fine. At the end of the day, everyone has their own preferences, their likes and dislikes. I may think a certain way about Baldur's Gate 3, but it doesn't mean you have to agree or think like me too. We're all entitled to our own opinions, and we should do our best to respect each other and have an open discussion about the game. After all, that's why I started this YouTube channel, to talk to you guys about the games I like. And right now, I'm really liking Baldur's Gate 3. Although I do have a confession to make. Before I even learned what D&D was, I was already a Larian Studios fan. Shocker, I know. Divinity Original Sin 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. I still owe it to my friend from college who introduced me to Divinity back in my freshman year. Since then, I've made so many wonderful memories playing Divinity with my friends. Even in the alternate universe where I never got into D&D, I'd bet that there's a high chance I'd play Baldur's Gate 3 anyway, just because it's made by Larian. Despite being in different franchises, Baldur's Gate 3 is 100% Divinity's spiritual successor. It incorporates much of what made Divinity so good in the first place. As a result, Baldur's Gate 3 managed to not only match the quality level Divinity set as a CRPG, but it even exceeded them, improving every aspect of combat, exploration, and role-playing of the previous game. It's basically the same game that was already really good, by the way, but somehow they found a way to make it even better, all the while incorporating 5e D&D into its story, world building, and gameplay. Larian could have played it safe and just made Original Sin 3, especially considering that the Divinity series is already critically acclaimed in its own right. But instead, they took the huge risk of adapting their style of games into one of the biggest IPs in all of gaming history, working with Wizards of the Coast to revive an old franchise and finally making the game that we all know and love today. The truth is that they don't make RPGs anymore like Larian does. Banger after banger, Larian just doesn't miss. Baldur's Gate 3 has cemented itself as the most popular CRPG that has ever existed, breaking Steam records of peak concurrent players even weeks after its release. You know you've made a good-ass game when other developers in the industry are criticizing your game out of jealousy, calling your game an anomaly instead of celebrating the milestones it has reached since it released. It's sad that there's even an argument that Baldur's Gate 3, for some reason, shouldn't be used to quote-unquote raise the standards to RPGs moving forward. And why shouldn't we exactly? Is there something inherently wrong to want to play RPGs as good, if not better, than Baldur's Gate 3? Sure, we shouldn't expect indie developers, especially, the smaller studios, to create a game on the same scale. However, the standards that Baldur's Gate 3 are supposedly raising strikes fear in some game companies, especially AAA studios with way more money and resources than Larian. Baldur's Gate 3's mainstream success proves that gamers shouldn't have to put up with AAA studios anymore that don't seem to make games out of passion, but instead for the sake of profit. Ultimately, it's valuable not only in the industry, but also for consumers for a game like Baldur's Gate 3 to exist, reminding both developers and players what a genuinely good RPG is actually like. There's a reason why the game is so universally acclaimed from a wide range of people. It's not a bullshit live service, nor does it have any in-game microtransactions because the people working at Larian have standards. Baldur's Gate 3 has been such a monumental, genre-defining game, and I'm sure that over time it'll help inspire a new wave of RPGs in the near future. So I say fuck the haters and let it raise standards for RPGs moving forward, because Baldur's Gate 3 really is a modern masterpiece. Thank you for watching.
The Tiefling was clear. If there are Githyanki west of here, that must be our objective. Purification cannot wait.